G'day folks, welcome back to another Kiwi Farm update. Hope you're all staying dry out there. Been a bit of a mixed bag weather-wise, hasn't it? Right, let's crack into what's been happening this week across New Zealand agriculture. And there's quite a bit to unpack. So this week's been a tale of two halves, really. On the dairy side, we've had some bloody good news from the global dairy trade auction that's got everyone feeling a bit more optimistic about milk payouts. But over in the meat sector, it's a different story. Works are gearing up for their seasonal peak, but farmers aren't exactly rushing to send stock through because the grass is actually growing for once. Meanwhile, there's talk heating up again about rebuilding ewe numbers, and MPI's dropped 2 bits of regulatory stuff that'll affect how we do things day to day with animal health and border work. Let's start with the dairy news, because honestly, it's the bright spot of the week. At the latest GDT auction, the price index jumped 6.7%. And get this, that's the biggest single rise we've seen since March 2021. Pretty much everything went up across the board. Most products gained somewhere between 5 and 10%, and some items like skim milk powder and mozzarella were showing double-digit increases. Now, for Kiwi dairy farmers, this isn't just some number on a screen. It's directly feeding into Farmgate milk price expectations. When you get 3 auctions in a row trending upward like this, it gives you a solid foundation for planning your autumn spending, your feed budgets, and your animal health work. The practical upshot? When prices are holding steady or climbing, you're not stuck in that end-of-season panic mode where you're cutting corners on everything just to save a few bucks. What happens next really depends on the next round of GDT results and how global demand handles the volumes coming onto the market. Plus, we'll need to see what the analysts reckon about whether this is just seasonal movement or genuine demand picking up. Now, flip over to the meat side, and the word of the week has been flow, or rather, lack of it. The flow of prime stock to processors has seriously slowed down right when the meat companies are usually ramping up for peak season. The reason's pretty straightforward. We've had some rain, grass is growing, and farmers are holding on to stock to finish them properly instead of rushing to offload and restock. Fair enough, really, but this creates a bit of a headache for the processors because they've got staff rostered on, shifts ready to go, and the volumes just aren't coming through. For farms, there's 2 sides to this coin. On the plus side, you get a chance to improve condition and pack on a bit more weight. On the downside, there's logistics risk. If everyone decides to send stock at once later on, booking slots could get tight, and you might end up waiting around, which eats into your returns. What happens next is all about weather and pasture condition. If the grass keeps growing, farmers will hold on a bit longer. But if pasture starts to struggle or cash flow gets tight, that flow will speed right up, and the works will be flat out trying to handle it all. Third thing to talk about is sheep, and specifically the question everyone's asking. Are we actually going to see a proper rebuild of the breeding flock? According to what's happening in the market, you can gauge confidence by what people are willing to pay for breeding stock. And this week, the prices were looking pretty solid. Young ewes were selling back up over $300 a head, and decent older ewes were going for over $200. But here's the thing. The commentary wasn't all sunshine and rainbows. Farmers remember all too well how quickly record prices can evaporate, and the decision to hold on to breeding ewes is an investment that plays out over months and years, not just next week's sale. The practical takeaway if you're thinking about flock structure is this. The market's signalling strong interest in finished lambs, but expanding your breeding numbers needs to be a calculated decision, not an emotional one. What'll give us clarity going forward is whether export returns stay stable and whether current Farmgate prices hold long enough for farmers to actually believe in them and start retaining more replacement stock. Fourth item is about vet medicines and biosecurity. I know, not exactly riveting stuff, but this is the kind of thing that bites you during compliance checks. MPI, through New Zealand Food Safety, has opened consultation on updating the guidance document for labelling veterinary medicines. This covers what information needs to be on the labels of vet products registered under the ACVM Act. The consultation opened on the 18th of December 2025, and submissions close on the 15th of February 2026 at 5 p.m. The draft updates include new and clarified sections, including stuff about website references and social media, even QR codes, plus various product categories and standard label statements. For farms and vet services, this could affect how products move through the system and how suppliers change their packaging and instructions. If you're buying in bulk, keeping detailed treatment records and managing withholding periods properly, it's worth keeping an eye on these updates so you don't get blindsided by sudden changes to labeling requirements. What's next is waiting for the consultation to close and the final version of the guidance to be published. Fifth thing is about money and regulation, but again, it touches animal health directly. MPIs put out proposed changes to cost recovery settings for 2026, and there are bits in there affecting veterinary work related to imports and handling live animals at the border. The document specifically proposes clarifying and expanding the application of veterinary charges for import-related work. There's a rate mentioned of $216.84 per hour, and tidying up how after-hours charges are calculated with a clearer, more detailed fee schedule. The practical effect for the industry is this: any changes to cost recovery usually ripple through the whole chain, from border procedures and inspections through to costs for companies moving products and animals through regulatory processes. Doesn't mean everything's suddenly going to cost more tomorrow, but it does mean the rules for calculating fees are changing publicly, and you can actually provide feedback on them. What happens next depends on the consultation timeline and MPI's final decisions after they've reviewed submissions. Then we'll know what actually makes it into the regulations and how it'll be applied in practice. And quickly on weather, because this week it's not just forecast chat, it's actually a risk factor for pasture and logistics. NIWA's published their seasonal climate outlook for February through April, and for several regions they're forecasting higher than normal rainfall probabilities. They've also noted that as the season progresses, there's increased risk of systems coming from the tropics and subtropics that could bring significant rainfall events, especially for the North Island. For livestock farmers, this is mainly about two things: pasture and access to paddocks and roads. Extra water can be brilliant for grass growth, but it's a bloody nightmare for moving stock around, getting machinery on paddocks, and anywhere you don't want to be bogged down. What to watch isn't the whole seasonal picture, but the week-by-week windows and heavy rainfall warnings, because those are what'll actually mess up your transport and work plans. Alright folks, so here's the week in a nutshell. Dairy got a solid market boost upward. Meat processing is dealing with flow headaches. There's cautious optimism creeping back into the sheep sector, and MPI's put out a couple of regulatory documents worth paying attention to, because these are the rules that end up in your daily operations. Right, that's your lot for this week. If you found this useful, chuck us a like and hit that subscribe button. Helps us keep bringing you the relevant farming news without the nonsense. Stay safe out there. Keep an eye on those weather forecasts. And here's hoping you all have a smooth week on the farm. Cheers!